This is AMTV. Hello there everyone, and welcome to part 22 of this series looking at the history and impact of Doctor Who viewing figures. If you're joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. We hope you stick around for future instalments, and check out our previous episodes. We've covered the first 5 Doctor's eras, which can now be enjoyed as either individual instalments or via omnibus-style compilations. But for now, sit back, relax, and join me once again as we delve back into the wonderfully niche world of Doctor Who viewing figures. Our destination? Season 22. In the first few days of 1985, viewers were gearing up for the return of Doctor Who once again, this time its 22nd season, and with a brand new Doctor piloting the TARDIS. Colin Baker had officially made his debut in the closing serial of the previous season, The Twin Dilemma. The experiment to show a more erratic, unstable Doctor was certainly an interesting idea, but one in which didn't hit all the right marks. Audiences were left not liking the 6th incarnation of the beloved Time Lord, and those that did had to wait almost a full year to see him again. Producer John Nathan Turner still had a few ideas up his sleeve, however, which he hoped would bring the viewers coming back in droves. One of the biggest shake-ups was the format of the show itself. Ever since its inception, Doctor Who had broadcast 25-minute long episodes. However, the previous year, Resurrection of the Daleks broke that mould by having its 4 standard-length episodes become 2 45-minute long features, which went down successfully with viewers, and gaining the highest viewing average of the season. It was partly this success that would result in all stories of Season 22 adopting the 45-minute length, and returning to Doctor Who's staple position of the Saturday tea time slot, the first time the show had occupied the space since early 1981. So, with bumper-length episodes and a return to Saturday nights, surely this alone would spell great success for Doctor Who as far as ratings were concerned, especially with the new Doctor finally getting a proper chance to show himself off to audiences. Let's take a deep dive into Season 22 and find out if this seemingly assured success came to pass. The first story from Season 22 is Attack of the Cybermen. In 1985, Halley's Comet approaches Earth. Arriving in London, the Doctor and Peri discover that Cybermen from the future intend to use the comet to destroy the Earth and change the course of history. This story is comprised of 2 45-minute episodes, which began airing on the 5th of January 1985 and concluded the following week on the 12th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for both episodes, and we have a strong start here, but sadly it doesn't hold. Part 1 of the story attracted a whopping 8.9 million viewers, a figure the programme hadn't achieved since Part 3 of Time Flight back in 1982. Part 2, however, doesn't quite reach the same feat. In the space of just 1 week, nearly 2 million audience members had decided to dip out of the story, with now 7.2 million tuning in. Whilst this result is still respectable by 1985 standards, it's quite surprising that almost 2 million viewers decided not to continue with the story to see how it concluded. In regards to the top 40 programmes, despite the initial high viewing figures, Doctor Who ended up nowhere near the top 40 itself. Part 1 came in at 71st, and Part 2 fell into triple digits, rounding off at 104th place. Not the best result for your season opener. So, even though Attack of the Cybermen kicked Season 22 off with one of the best ratings results in years, what was causing so many audience members to drop off partway through? Well, I think we need to address the format shake-up and how that could have affected things. As mentioned, episodes were now 45 minutes in length as opposed to 25, and Doctor Who was back airing on Saturday nights as opposed to twice weekly, as it had been doing for the past 3 years. Many viewers rejoiced that the sci-fi staple was back in its traditional slot, but in terms of its place in the schedule, it was much earlier in the evening than people had expected. Since the early 70s, Doctor Who had gone out either close to, on, or after 6 PM, with the Peter Davison years even going closer to 7, which was seen as more of a prime-time slot. For Season 22, the original transmission time was penciled to be around 6:15, slightly earlier than the last few seasons, but still familiar territory. However, controller of BBC One, Michael Grade, decided to shift the show 50 minutes earlier, with the new time being 5:20. Grade took this decision as he felt the programme would run better in this earlier slot, especially with its expanded runtime. This meant Doctor Who was going out in a slot it hadn't occupied predominantly since the 1960s, and, as a result, it could have impacted the viewing figures. Or perhaps the format itself put viewers off. The 1.7 million dip in viewership between parts 1 and 2 indicate that something wasn't clicking. It could have been the length, but it sadly could have also been down to the new Doctor. This isn't Colin's fault directly, but often a first Doctor's opening story would attract higher viewership initially, before dipping with subsequent episodes. Now, I know this wasn't Colin's first adventure, that technically goes to the previous year's Twin Dilemma, but keep in mind, audiences hadn't seen the Sixth Doctor for 9 months, and for those who didn't warm to him in the opening story, may have been further put off by how the Doctor is characterised here. Of course, this is all speculative theory, but I think a lot of it does hold weight, considering how sharp the viewing figures dropped between episodes. But we also need to consider our 2 regular factors, competition and promotion. For the former, ITV decided to air one of the most popular American imports of the day against Doctor Who, and that of course was the A-Team. The show managed to steal away sizable chunks of viewership away from Peter Davison's final season, and given the continued popularity of Mr. T and his colleagues, the same effect could have definitely happened here. I will give a mention to the VCR market, however, which was beginning to really boom as the 1980s progressed. Players and tapes were gradually coming down in price and becoming more affordable for households to acquire. And whilst more people were recording Doctor Who year after year, the measures used to calculate ratings didn't consider these recordings, still primarily focusing on live viewers. Home recordings wouldn't be considered for several decades to come, so more on that when we get there. For promotion, Attack of the Cybermen got a decent bout of it, but perhaps not as much as you'd expect for a season opener. The first bit of publicity actually came several months before transmission, in the July of 1984. A photo call was held with Colin in costume as the Doctor, joined by guest star Faith Brown, who was due to play the Cryon Flast, but she wasn't asked to don her costume for the promo shoot. Brown would later appear on BBC One's Breakfast Time on the 13th of July to discuss her upcoming role with the presenters, though viewers wouldn't get a glimpse of her for another 6 months. Closer to transmission, the Radio Times promoted the opening episode with a monochrome photo of the Doctor, together with a shot of a Cyberman. Sadly, no full colour spreads, or even better, a front cover, but at least the programme was still being pushed somewhat in the Listings magazine. However, for Part 2, the back pages section was dedicated to the episode, with full colour photos of a Cyberman, some Cryons, and guest star Sarah Green. Promotion via TV was a bit more substantial. The day before Part 1, on Friday the 4th of January, Breakfast Time once again promoted the season opener, with a short extract from Part 1, and the following day, Colin Baker, together with Nicola Bryant, Jacqueline Pearce and Mary Tam, appeared on the hit children's show Saturday Superstore. All 4 actors had been appearing in the pantomime Cinderella, which had begun on Boxing Day 1984 and was produced and directed by Doctor Who's producer, John Nathan Turner. A small clip from Part 2 was also previewed as, funnily enough, host Sarah Green was appearing as one of the Cryons. Finally, on the day of Part 1's broadcast, trailers for the story started doing the rounds on BBC One, alerting viewers of the early start time and that Doctor Who was back on Saturday nights. Even though it could have been more expansive, it seems the promotional hype for the beginning of Season 22 had worked, given the near 9 million who tuned in for Part 1. Attack of the Cybermen is one of those stories that I feel is a little bit underrated. Now, does it have problems? God, yes, it does. The story is chock full of continuity references to earlier adventures from back in the 60s, and don't get me wrong, nowadays that information is a lot more accessible, but back in 1985, when repeat viewings of black and white episodes were rare, and many of them were believed to no longer exist, only those who were there for their original airings almost 20 years prior may have fully understood the full context of many of these references. The other main criticism is that this story is full of unnecessary violence. Now, I don't mind me some violence in Doctor Who, and I actually find a lot of it here fairly acceptable given what's going on in the story, but of course, there are moments that seem a little excessive. The classic example, of course, is this. Yeah, this seems quite bleak for Doctor Who. On the positive side, I really do enjoy the adventure as a season opener. The tone echoes the dark, gloomy nature of Resurrection of the Daleks, and Colin and Nicola are an effective TARDIS team, even if they do bicker a lot in these stories. But the one who sells it for me is Maurice Colburn as Lytton. The character also appeared in Resurrection, and both times Maurice plays him with a wonderful sinister quality, whilst keeping him completely sympathetic by story's end. The rather downbeat ending I think is quite poignant, as for all his wonderful qualities, even the Doctor every now and then needs reminding to not be so prejudiced and judgmental. Overall, this story attracted an average of 8.1 million viewers. That's a 1 million increase from the previous story, The Twin Dilemma, and a 0.8 boost from the previous season opener, Warriors of the Deep. It's great to see Doctor Who average over 8 million again, as it hadn't occurred since 1982, and to start off your new season with higher numbers than before is always a plus. However, given the sharp drop between episodes, I'm afraid that this impressive average won't remain consistent across the next few stories. That aside, Attack of the Cybermen, if anything, remains one of the more intriguing watches from the wide world of classic Who. It is very Marmite, you'll either love it or hate it for various reasons, but like all serials, absolutely give it a chance. I really enjoy it, and even from my early days as a Who fan, it was one of the stories that intrigued me the most. If you're similarly intrigued, you can read the Target book from 1989, or enjoy an audio adaptation from 1995, initially released on cassette, before it was eventually released on CD in 2004 as part of the Tales from the TARDIS series. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 2000, where it was packaged together with the 10th Planet as part of a Cybermen tin set. Alternatively, you can enjoy Attack on DVD, where it was issued as a standalone release in 2009. To start off your new season with a returning monster is always a solid move, and you can hardly get better than the Cybermen. I think that the story is one of the more menacing appearances they have, where they can truly showcase not only their strength, but the brutality in which they execute said strength. Set aside an hour and a half and give Attack of the Cybermen a go, as, like I say, you may even find yourself a new favourite.
I don't think I've ever misjudged anybody quite as badly as I did Lytton.
The second story from Season 22 is Vengeance on Varos. Requiring the rare mineral Zyton 7 to repair the TARDIS, the Doctor and Peri arrive on the planet Varos. There they unwillingly become contestants on the colony's barbaric reality TV show, in which prisoners are tortured and executed for the viewer's entertainment. This story is comprised of two 45-minute episodes, which began airing on the 19th of January 1985 and concluded the following week on the 26th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for both episodes, and it seems that the numbers are holding steady around the 7 million range. Sadly, we don't see a figure close to the 9 million that Part 1 of Attack of the Cybermen drew in, but at least these two episodes draw in similar results, rather than one being wildly different from the other. For the top 40 programmes, both episodes fall into triple figures outside of the top 100. Part 1 clocks in at 110th, and Part 2 managed to inch gently above that, finishing at 108th place. So, is around 7 million going to be the standard for the Sixth Doctor's first season? Why couldn't Vengeance on Varos bring the viewing figures up to match what the programme was pulling in just a few years ago? Well, for one, the competition over at ITV continued to be quite the threat to Doctor Who. The Time Lord was continuing to face off against the action-orientated antics of the A-Team, whose popularity only grew with each new episode. Still, despite Mr. T and Co proving to be a ratings juggernaut, Doctor Who managed to still attract over 7 million viewers, so thankfully not everyone had given up on the new Doctor's adventures just yet. Promotion for the serial was an interesting mix. You had features in the tabloids as usual, but standout promotional moments came down to the story's guest cast. Firstly, you had the main villain, Syl, played excellently by Nabil Shaban. The actor's leading role in Doctor Who here helped promote the Fair Play campaign, which aimed to help performers with disabilities, such as Shaban himself, gain more recognition and subsequent parts on television. However, a surprise bit of last-minute promotion came from the appearance of Jason Connery, who was playing Jondar in this serial. Son of the original screen James Bond, Sean Connery, Jason hadn't originally been awarded guest star status for his stint on Varos. However, after filming had been completed, he was cast as the new lead of hit ITV drama Robin of Sherwood, which would see him debut alongside the start of the third season. This huge casting announcement led to the BBC organising a press release just 2 days before Part 1's transmission, in which Connery's forthcoming appearance was extensively promoted. Vengeance on Varos is a story that frequently gets cited as being the superior standout from Season 22, and to some extent, I find that hard to disagree with. The world of Varos is incredibly intricate, both in its appearance but also in how its society is structured and operates. The notion of a people being enraptured with video nasties may seem a typically 80s theme, as this indeed was a constant talking point, but the concept works extremely well within the world of Doctor Who. Nabil Shaban absolutely shines as Syl, a creature who almost revels in his own viciousness and vulgarness. Martyn Jarvis delivers a cracking performance as the Governor, and once again, the TARDIS team continued to be on top of their game. Writer Philip Martin, who before Who was primarily known for dark, gritty shows such as Gangsters, brings his trademark tones to Vengeance on Varos, and whilst the harshness of the action certainly has its impact, there were some members of the viewing public who thought such harshness was pushed a step too far. Several scenes from these adventures were criticised for their violent or morbid content, with the acid bath scene in particular drawing lots of unwanted attention. The manner of the death is rather nasty, but it's the Doctor's almost nonchalant response that rubbed several audience members the wrong way.
You forgive me if I don't join you.
Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.1 million viewers, a 1 million drop from the previous story. It seems the initial intrigue and speculation about the new Doctor had well and truly worn off, as this figure is more in line with many of the final few stories of the Peter Davison era. However, despite the long wait for season 22, the return to Saturdays and the bumper-length episodes, for the show to remain steady at 7 million surely indicates that the core of the show remained intact. Whether you revel in the bleakness of the broadcasts, hide in horror at the various nasty manners in which people are dispatched, or just enjoy it for its political undertones, Vengeance on Varos works on many different levels for many different people. To see which particular angle works for you, you can read the Target book from 1988, or its audio adaptation from 2019. There's also another audio adaptation of this story, read by Colin Baker no less, that was released on cassette tape in 1997 before being issued on CD in 2004 as part of the Tales from the TARDIS series. To watch Vengeance on Varos, you have the VHS release from 1993, the original DVD release from 2001, or a 2-disc re-release from 2012, in which it was dubbed as the Special Edition. Vengeance on Varos is one of the most memorable adventures from Season 22, and for many, it's the crowning jewel. A beautiful visual aesthetic, a twisted topic to base your society on, a wonderful lead villain, and a story that genuinely feels tailor-made for the Sixth Doctor, allowing Colin to really flex his acting muscles and his take on the part. An absolute must-watch. One of the best of the 80s.
And cut it now.
The third story from Season 22 is The Mark of the Rani. The TARDIS brings the Doctor and Peri to the English mining town of Killingworth in the 19th century. There the Doctor encounters inventor George Stephenson, as well as 2 other Time Lords, the ruthless Rani and his old nemesis, the Master. This story is comprised of 2 45-minute episodes, which began airing on the 2nd of February 1985 and concluded the following week on the 9th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for both episodes, and things seem to be slipping further downwards, not a trend we want to see occur. Part 1 pulls in 6.3 million viewers, losing almost a million from the concluding part of the last story, but don't worry, not all hope is lost. Part 2 of the adventure managed to boost the figures up by 1 million, to finish with 7.3 million viewers tuning in, a much more stable and respectable showing. Whilst these are far from the worst figures in the show's history, the near dip to below 6 million is a little concerning. When looking at the top 40 programmes, Part 1 falls out of the top 100, finishing at 111th place, but Part 2 managed to find its way back up to a double-figure result, charting at 84th place. A better showing for sure, but still quite away from reaching the top 40 itself. So what happened with The Mark of the Rani to see it lose a million viewers during its opening instalment? Well, for starters, the competition over at ITV was remaining as resilient as ever. The A-Team was still the prime opponent for Doctor Who, and in terms of viewing figures and audience interest, it made its presence felt. The Time Lord did overlap slightly with other programmes as well, though rather than being networked like the A-Team was, the selection varied depending on the region that the viewer lived in. Examples of overlap competition included Cartoon Alphabet, Lakeland Game, Different Strokes, and Blockbusters. Promotional efforts were a bit more positive, with the serial gaining some coverage in the back pages of the Radio Times and Nicola Bryant popping up in different newspapers. The Daily Express ran an article which featured her boyfriend, Scott Kennedy, who actually was her husband of 2 years, but had been asked to be seen as a boyfriend by producer John Nathan Turner. Showbiz promotion for you, I suppose. Meanwhile, in the Sunday Mirror, it was reported that Nicola had turned down £20,000 to appear naked. As you can tell, tabloids haven't changed much over the years in terms of content. Anthony Ainley also did some promotional rounds too, leading up to his return as the Master in this story. For the Daily Express, he commented that he was fond of the Master. He pays my bills. However, the shining feature of this adventure, and one who was strangely absent from much of the promotional drive, is Kate O'Mara playing the leading villain, the Rani. Another renegade Time Lord with a brilliant mind for science and a bitter disdain for her male counterparts. Kate was already a household name, being recognisable to millions from her starring role in soap opera Triangle, which had aired some years previously. As the Rani, it's clear from start to finish that she is absolutely relishing the role and delivers a performance that some may class as a bit camp, but one that is so much fun you can't take your eyes off her. The story is a decent one, a Victorian setting is no stranger to Doctor Who, though for me at least, I feel this is a tale that doesn't benefit the best from the new 45-minute format. There's a few moments that feel a tad dragged out for the sake of it, but that aside, to see 3 Time Lords going at each other and lots of wacky antics alongside, then The Mark of the Rani will get the job done for you. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.8 million viewers, a 0.3 drop from the previous story. And so, we've also slipped below the 7 million mark. Not necessarily a disastrous point, but to see the downward trend of viewership continue as Colin's reign as the Doctor progresses is a little disheartening. But we still have 3 more stories to go, so hopefully the numbers may swing upward before the season is out. The mark of the Rani is often overlooked when I see Season 22 retrospectives. Considering this run of serials is jam-packed with returning villains or strong concepts or aesthetics, it's easy for this one to slip through the cracks. However, I would argue it's absolutely worth your consideration. The banter and interactions between the Doctor, Master and Rani are fantastic. All 3 actors are clearly loving every second, and Victorian settings are always nice to see in the programme. It may not be the best, but it's bags of fun, and if you want to muck in and check it out for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1986, or its audio adaptation from 2018. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 1995, or the standalone DVD release from 2006. The Rani is such an instantly memorable villain, one who Kate O'Mara plays to absolute perfection, and call it a funny hunch, but I don't think this is the last time that we're going to encounter her, but more on that when we get there. So settle down and check this adventure out. You'll be laughing 1 minute and squirming the next, which is one of the many things that Doctor Who can do best. The 4th story from Season 22 is The Two Doctors. In Seville, Spain, the Doctor crosses paths with one of his earlier selves, while Peri finds she is on the menu of a cannibalistic chef. The 2 Doctors must combine forces to prevent the Sontarans and the scheming Chicini from acquiring time travel technology. This story is comprised of 3 45-minute episodes, which began airing on the 16th of February 1985 and concluded on the 2nd of March. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 3 episodes, and this is exactly the result I was dreading to see crop up at some point during Season 22. All 3 episodes fall under 7 million and lock themselves in the 6 million range. Part 3 records the highest showing, with 6.9 million viewers tuning in. Part 1 falls slightly lower, with 6.6 million, but Part 2 records the lowest result of Season 22 thus far, with just 6 million viewers. To see Doctor Who drop below 6 million is a heartbreaking sight, and whilst The Two Doctors doesn't succumb to that, it comes very close indeed. For the top 40 TV programmes, surprisingly, all 3 episodes managed to stay within the top 100, with parts 1 and 2 charting at 92nd and 90th respectively, whilst part 3 achieves quite a boost over them, finishing up at 66th place, proving to be one of the highest chart placings of a Season 22 episode thus far. What happened here with the 2 Doctors then? Multi-Doctor stories were, and still are, seen as a big deal, so why didn't that translate over to this story's viewing figures? You probably think I sound like a broken record by now, but the power of the A-Team was still working against the TARDIS team in the Saturday night schedules. Beginning 15 minutes after Who kicked off, it's reasonable to assume that those loyal to the other side were either not watching Doctor Who at all, or were switching over once Mr. T and Co began their latest mission that week. Prior to the A-Team starting, the first 15 minutes of Who went against many of the programmes mentioned previously, which varied depending on the region that you lived in. Promotionally, you would have thought that this would be a goldmine of opportunity. With 2 Doctors featuring, the chance of front covers, interviews and TV appearances were there, but it seems like relatively little effort was made to capitalise on this. In late 1984, Patrick Troughton had made an appearance on leading children's programme Blue Peter, but this was to promote his role in the Christmas classic The Box of Delights. Doctor Who was brought up briefly, but the sci-fi staple was not the real focus here. Nevertheless, Pat's appearance as Cole Hawlings would have introduced him to a whole new generation of children, some of which may have been curious in seeing him turn up in Doctor Who as one of the Time Lord's incarnations. There were no special feature articles in the Radio Times outside of the usual listings, but one of the most surprising promotional spots occurred on television, when immediately after Part 2 aired, that week's Jim'll Fix It featured a segment titled A Fix with Sontarans, in which young fan Gareth Jenkins teamed up with Colin Baker and Janet Fielding, reprising her role as Tegan, to take out some invading Sontarans. Over 10 million viewers tuned into this 5-minute sketch, around 4 million more than those who had just been watching The Two Doctors itself. However, between parts 2 and 3, on Wednesday the 27th of February, fans of Doctor Who were about to encounter some truly shocking news. The 1986 season of Doctor Who, its 23rd, was to be delayed, widening the gap between story transmissions by double. Instead of the usual 9 months, it would now be 18 months before viewers would see the Doctor again on BBC One. The man behind the decision, Michael Grade, was the controller of the channel, and he had been harbouring thoughts towards the show for some time. He cited several moments from season 22 that he believed to be nasty and overly violent. From the two Doctors specifically, moments such as Shockeye biting into a rat, and that same character later facing death by cyanide, from the Doctor no less, were seen as steps too far by some viewers, Michael Grade included. He decreed that the programme needed the extended rest to find a new direction, and improve on what he perceived to be tired and ropey stories that were a far cry from the so-called golden days of the 1960s. It wasn't an outright cancellation, but this was arguably the further major dent in the tried and tested armour that Doctor Who had been wearing for over 20 years. And many perceived this moment to be the first step in what would ultimately culminate in the show's eventual downfall. But more on that when we get there. Back to the story at hand, The Two Doctors is often maligned by people for being too long, crammed full of continuity references, and excessive violence, to name a few. However, I've always adored this story from start to finish. Patrick Troughton slips right back into the role of the Second Doctor, as does Fraser Hines, whom, after a cameo in The Five Doctors, feels right at home as Jamie McCrimmon once again. Their interactions with each other, and indeed the current TARDIS team, are wonderful to witness, and I love all the lore behind the Androgums, with Jacqueline Pearce and John Stratton delivering wonderful contrasting performances as Cassini and Shockeye respectively. The Sontarans are also here, another returning villain for season 22, and aside from their unusual tall height, they remain a credible villain in my book. Their presence may feel a little bit shoehorned in, but they're just as thrilling to watch as ever. Robert Holmes returns to Doctor Who to pen the script, and whilst I respect and agree to a level that 3 45-minute instalments may be a tad too long, in terms of how the dialogue is written, it's still quintessential Holmes stuff. We are also treated to lots of lovely location work in sunny Spain. This marked the third year in a row in which Doctor Who travelled abroad, and the lush settings of Seville give this serial an air of elegance and flair that is so unusual to see in the classic series. So despite it not being as revered as other multi-Doctor adventures, definitely consider giving The Two Doctors a good watch. It's a blast all the way through, and sadly marks the last appearance of Patrick Troughton as the Doctor. Having first played the role in 1966, Patrick was instrumental in not only ensuring Doctor Who's continuation, but also in defining the role for generations to come. There's a reason why so many future Doctors cite Patrick as an inspiration. His bumbling yet intelligent nature is one that we see many incarnations take on, all with his trademark warmth and brilliance. The Second Doctor is still beloved by millions, and it cemented the legacy that Patrick left behind. As 2 years later, in 1987, whilst attending a convention in the USA, Patrick suffered a fatal heart attack. According to paramedics, he had died instantly. He was 67 years old. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.5 million viewers, a 0.3 drop from the previous story. We're slowly sliding down towards falling out of the 6 million range. If that happens, it would be the first time the programme did so since 1980, and usually when a show drops into 5 million viewers or lower, you're looking at trouble, especially back in the mid-80s. Such a shame that the presence of two Doctors and the Sontarans as returning villains couldn't bolster those numbers back up. For all of its flaws, I would find it hard to agree with the notion that The Two Doctors is boring. It's a classic sci-fi adventure, penned by one of the series' most acclaimed writers, and with Two Doctors, you can't claim you aren't getting the bang for your buck. To enjoy it for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1985, or its audio adaptation from 2015. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 1993, or the standalone DVD release from 2003, which was included a few years later in 2008 on the Bread for War box set, alongside the Time Warrior, the Sontaran Experiment, and the Invasion of Time. Just to note, the 2003 DVD was re-released in 2013, the only alteration being the special feature removal of the Jim'll Fix It sketch, A Fix with Sontarans. I'm sure we all know why that decision was made. The Two Doctors remains as one of my favourite multi-Doctor stories across any form of media. It's fun, it's action-packed, features some wonderful dialogue, some genuinely chilling scenes, and plenty of memorable moments, for better or for worse. Just make sure you're not starving when you watch it, otherwise, like Shockeye, you may get a little peckish.
Stop! I've come a long way for you.
Naturally. Don't expect any thanks.
The fifth and penultimate story from season 22 is Timelash. The Doctor makes an unexpected return visit to the planet Karfel when the TARDIS is caught in a time disturbance. The Doctor discovers that Karfel is now ruled by the Borad, and war is brewing with the neighbouring Vandrels. This story is comprised of two 45-minute episodes, which began airing on the 9th of March 1985 and concluded the following week on the 16th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for both episodes, and there is a small improvement from the preceding story, but a far cry from years past. Part 1 continues to finish within the 6 million range, with 6.7 million viewers tuning in, but thankfully Part 2 manages to draw in a nice boost of viewership, with 7.4 million viewers. Despite audiences learning the news recently that the show would be on an extended hiatus, it seems that the news could have possibly contributed to this little boost. We'll explore that possibility in just a moment. When looking at the top 40 programmes, once again, both episodes managed to hold within the top 100, with Part 1 being the winner of the two, charting at 69th, whereas Part 2, despite having a higher viewership, falls 10 places lower, finishing at 79th place. So, as Doctor Who was about to embark on one of the longest breaks in its history thus far, what was it about Timelash that managed to bring in that little bit of extra viewership? Funnily enough, the announcement of Doctor Who's extended hiatus did see a small boost in viewers for the closing instalment of The Two Doctors, so perhaps the interest from the casual viewer was sparked? With all the talks of a violent and tired show, it could be argued that some possibly tuned in just to see if those claims were true. It's impressive that Timelash raised the viewership when looking over at the main competition it faced on ITV, for on the other side, Robin of Sherwood kicked off its second series. Having been a smash hit a year previously in 1984, just like with the A-Team, viewers were presented with the ever-difficult choice of which programme they wished to dedicate their time to. Doctor Who did have a 15-minute lead on the Merry Men, facing off against the same array of different regional competition, which included a new face, the Smurfs. Promotion for Timelash was rather minimal, the only noteworthy addition being a small article in the Daily Mail regarding the history of the Doctor's female companions. However, the Time Lord was appearing elsewhere in the media world, namely in the form of a charity single, Doctor in Distress. Devised by longtime viewer and unofficial continuity advisor Ian Levine, the song was an attempt to create a Live Aid style anthem, but with the notion of celebrating and saving Doctor Who from its extended break off the air. The song is interesting, and if you haven't heard it before, go and check it out, but prepare your ears, especially with some of the singing. The track was deemed so poor a quality that even the BBC themselves refused to air it on their radio stations, though you could grab a copy in the shops as either a 7 or 12-inch vinyl single. All proceeds were being donated to cancer relief, so that's something positive, I suppose. Charity singles aside, Timelash sadly exemplifies one element that Michael Grade criticised the show for, that being the rather tired appearance of it. Don't get me wrong, some scenes such as the Borad's lair look fantastic, but a lot of the time the sets look flimsy, the Timelash itself leaves a lot to be desired, and beyond the aesthetics, the story also feels a little lacklustre. Peri gets the absolute worst treatment throughout, and whilst the appearance of H.G. Wells is charming and provides some of the best moments, it's hampered by a bit of hammy acting from the guest stars, and the Bandrels. Who could forget the Bandrels? Paul Darrow is the leading guest star, having made his name in the sci-fi world through Terry Nation's Blake 7, but his performance here splits viewers completely down the middle. Some believe it to be out of place and a bit hokey, whereas others commend him for a unique and daring take on the role. I'll leave it up to you to decide which camp you feel you belong to on that one. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.1 million viewers, a 0.6 increase from the previous story. It is great to see Doctor Who bring in an average of over 7 million again, but out of all the Season 22 adventures to do it, I'm honestly amazed that it was Timelash. But hey, after recently being told you'll be off the air for 18 months, I'm sure the Doctor Who team were taking any success that they could get. Timelash is often found in the bottom 10 of many story rankings lists, but despite its sour reputation, there are some who genuinely love it, and that's always been one of Doctor Who's great strengths, that for potentially any of its stories, there will always be someone who can find it absolutely brilliant. And to see whether you think Timelash is brilliant, you can read the Target book from 1985, but there's no audio adaptation as of yet. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 1998, or a standalone DVD release from 2007. Like many of the preceding adventures in Season 22, Timelash is far from boring. If you can shut your brain off and revel in the more ropey moments that this serial offers, then you'll have a whale of a time. But if Timelash stands as an example of who at its shakiest, then I'd argue the following adventure delivers the complete opposite.
Goodbye, Doctor. Unpleasant journey.
The sixth and final story from Season 22 is Revelation of the Daleks. The Doctor and Peri visit tranquil repose on the planet Necros, where the Doctor intends to pay his last respects to an old friend. There they discover that Davros is secretly manufacturing a new army of Daleks, with which he intends to conquer the universe. This story is comprised of two 45-minute episodes, which began airing on the 23rd of March 1985 and concluded the following week on the 30th of the same month. Here are the individual viewing figures for both episodes, and it's nice to see the numbers return to being firmly within the 7 million range for the season finale. Part 1 kicks things off with 7.4 million viewers, and Part 2 manages to bring in a few 100,000 more, rounding off the story, and season 22, with 7.7 million viewers, one of the strongest individual showings of the run. Translating those results to the top 40 programmes, Doctor Who once again missed out on a spot within that chart. However, both episodes of Revelation do remain within the top 100. Part 1 charts at 65th, and Part 2 records one of the highest chart placings of the season, finishing up at 58th place. Despite the news of a prolonged hiatus creating a somewhat somber mood amongst fans, how did Revelation of the Daleks manage to provide one last little boost in viewership for season 22? First thoughts turned to promotion, and efforts were certainly made for it to be some of the most elaborate of the year, but sadly it didn't come to pass. Producer John Nathan Turner had contacted the Radio Times to see if a colour feature, or even the coveted front cover, could be allocated to the season 22 finale. This sadly didn't happen, and the only notable feature in the listings magazine was a monochrome photo of two of the newly cream-coated Daleks, which accompanied Part 1. In terms of guest stars, there have been many rumours that renowned actor, Laurence Olivier, would be making an appearance, although a BBC press officer had to confirm that this was not the case. A famous performer who would be appearing, however, was comedian Alexei Sayle, who played the DJ at Tranquil Repose. Chatting with the Daily Express, Sayle discussed his love for the programme and also his nerves for taking a role within it. But if we put forward the notion that the BBC missed a major opportunity to promote Revelation, did ITV capitalise on this with its competition offerings? Well, not really, but they didn't really need to. Robin of Sherwood was progressing with its second series and was performing really well with audiences and in the viewing figures table, so a change in time slot away from Doctor Who was probably not necessary. Revelation of the Daleks saw the programme's viewing figures climb higher and higher, which is always a positive, but these achievements were somewhat downplayed due to the realisation of all those watching that this would be the last trip in the TARDIS for quite some time. Revelation of the Daleks is such a fascinating adventure. It's one of the darkest scripts ever put forward in Classic Who, and who else to craft the tale than Eric Saywood, who was also serving on the show as the script editor. Saywood was never shy to include numerous deaths and elements of violence into his stories, just look at Earthshock or Resurrection of the Daleks. Here, however, the element of death is played on so brilliantly via the concept of Tranquil Repose, a respite for the rich, only for them to be grotesquely transformed into a new race of Daleks. Davros is the being responsible, played once again by Terry Malloy, who I believe delivers his best TV performance of the megalomaniac here. The moments where he is quiet and slow talking are some of the most chilling scenes of any Who story, and I'm glad he gets such a big focus, and the Daleks take a back seat. The same could be said of the Doctor and Peri, who spend all of Part 1 just getting to Tranquil Repose from the TARDIS. It's a factor that many criticise, but I love that for the most part, this is a Davros story, showing how he uses his intellect, power, and influence on the unsuspecting around him. Speaking of Davros, his return, along with the Daleks, was teased by a continuity announcer when Timelash concluded. That, together with the now regular promotional spots on TV, could have sparked the interest of the more casual viewer, one who recognised the Daleks and was curious to see them once again battle the Time Lord. There are some moments of violence that some may argue again are a little too excessive. Joe Bell being killed with a syringe, Stengos begging his daughter to kill him, and a stabbing which we see the knife go in spring to mind. However, I would argue that if any story of Season 22 earns those moments of horror, then Revelation of the Daleks, together with Vengeance on Varos, would be my selections. It's a very different type of story, especially for Classic Who, but give it a chance regardless. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.6 million viewers, a 0.5 increase from the previous story. The downward trend has truly been defeated, and it's wonderful to see Season 22 close out on a high. The return of the Daleks and Davros still clearly had some resonance with all kinds of viewers, and despite the looming hiatus, Doctor Who ended things on a positive, rather than tumbling lower in the viewing figures table. We also have some repeat data for you. As part of a season on BBC Two to celebrate 30 years of the programme, Revelation of the Daleks was selected to represent the Colin Baker era, and was screened as 4 25-minute episodes across 4 consecutive Fridays. Airing from the 19th of March to the 9th of April, here are the viewing figures for this repeat, which averaged out at 1.59 million viewers, over 6 million less than the original broadcast just 8 years earlier. However, as typical with many of these 90s repeats, the same contributing factors are at play to result in these less than stellar numbers. Having been cancelled in 1989, Doctor Who had not been producing new episodes for almost 4 years. As a result, the interest in the programme was primarily kept up by the fanbase, with the more casual viewers dropping off almost entirely. Secondly, being the sister channel to BBC One, BBC Two almost always received considerably lower viewership than its big brother. That, combined with the growing accessibility of satellite television, and viewers had far more than merely a handful of channels to dedicate their time to. Revelation of the Daleks stands as not only one of the best stories of the Colin Baker era, but one of the greatest stories of all classic Who, at least in my view. To find out whether or not you agree with me, you can read the BBC Books release from 2019, or its audio adaptation released the same year. You can also enjoy this release under the Target imprint, which was released in 2021. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 1999, packaged together with Planet of the Daleks as part of a Dalek tin set. It was later issued on VHS again, this time as part of the Davros collection, which was released in 2001 and was exclusive to WH Smith's. On DVD, you can enjoy Revelation via a standalone release from 2005 or as part of numerous box sets. These include the Dalek collection from 2007, which was exclusive to Amazon, or the complete Davros collection, which was also released in 2007. It may be a very downbeat and gloomy ending for Season 22, but Revelation of the Daleks holds so much within its 2 episodes, whether it's the grotesque actions of Davros, the rebranding of the Daleks, or even just to see how Alexei Sayle fits in, there is something here for everyone. It's just a shame that we never find out where the Doctor planned on taking Peri to truly kick back and relax.
I suppose anywhere will be peaceful after Necros. All right. I'll take you to...
So that's Season 22, the 6 stories that comprise it, and the ratings that they garnered. With the transmission of Part 2 of Revelation of the Daleks, Season 22 was brought to an end, concluding a near 3-month run, comprised of 13 45-minute episodes across 6 stories. Now, let's have a look at the story averages for this season. The results are certainly less consistent than the previous year, but the highs are certainly higher, and the lows are also slightly lower. The clear winner is the season opener, Attack of the Cybermen, with 8.1 million viewers on average, the only story to cross into the 8 million range. The least viewed story is the multi-Doctor crossover, The Two Doctors, with 6.5 million viewers watching on average. It may be far from being the least viewed Doctor Who story over the last 22 years, but the closer the programme gets to falling below 6 million is always a slight cause for concern. Overall though, the averages displayed here from Season 22 arguably present a case that Doctor Who, despite the shake-up in format and Doctor, was still just as popular as it ever was, with a loyal viewership whom, whilst vocal, were always up for sitting down to tune into the escapades of the TARDIS team. Now, as we always do, let's work out the overall average for this season. By combining the average ratings for each story, we can calculate that the average viewing figures for Season 22 of Doctor Who stands at around roughly 7.2 million viewers, which mirrors the overall average gained by Season 21 the previous year. This result further supports the argument that despite all of the criticisms and the announcement of the 18-month hiatus, Doctor Who viewers weren't necessarily flocking away in their millions, but that the programme had a core viewership built up over the past 22 years that weren't quite tired of the Time Lord just yet. When we put this result against the previous 21 seasons, Season 22 sadly falls within the bottom 5, tying with Seasons 5, 7 and 21 for being the 4th least viewed season of the programme thus far. Again, a 7.2 million average overall is indeed quite healthy for a programme over 20 years old, but considering it still ranks in the bottom 5, arguably shows that the hyper-popularity spikes seen in the 60s and 70s wasn't exactly reoccurring as the 80s progressed on. Season 22 had a tall order on its hands right from the very start. Not only did it have to reintroduce audiences to the 6th Doctor after a 9-month absence, but it had to juggle the brand new 45-minute format and adapt its often traditional story structures into something more dramatic. Did it work every time? No, I'd argue it didn't. Stories like Timelash limp along, and the Two Doctors perhaps didn't need to be 3 episodes, but on the other hand, we get some stories that really dared to push the boundaries of what Doctor Who could do with its storytelling. The video nasty theme of Vengeance on Varos may focus on violence, but the way in which it's presented is wonderfully written, and Nabil Shaban Sil is an instantly memorable classic villain. As is the Rani, with Kate O'Mara delivering a brilliant performance that put her up alongside some of the Doctor's strongest enemies. The Big Four all return for this season, that being the Cybermen, the Master, the Sontarans and the Daleks, the first season in which they all appear. It may make things feel a little crammed, but their presence is always welcome nonetheless. Not to mention we got a multi-Doctor story thrown in the mix. Patrick Troughton shines as the second Doctor for one last time, and with Revelation of the Daleks ending the series on a creative high, it seemed almost ludicrous that the show was paused when it was. But if there was one thing that was for certain, it was that Colin Baker was most certainly the Doctor. His performance may not have been enjoyed by everyone at the time, and in retrospect, Colin has said he often didn't warm to how his incarnation was portrayed on TV, but he still retains the warmth, wit, and adventure that all of his predecessors held too. The hiatus may have dampened Colin's enthusiasm slightly, but he, along with his many fans, were excited and hopeful to see where his adventures would take him next. So after the dust had settled, after 18 long months had passed, after scripts had been thrown out and new ones took their place, would Doctor Who come back to the screen guns blazing, with a viewership higher than ever before? Or would things take a downward, more disturbing tumble? You'll have to join me next time to find out. So those are the ratings details for Season 22. I hope you enjoyed this numerical look back at the 6th Doctor's first run of adventures, and even though the season was tainted by the announcement of the 18-month hiatus, several of these stories, to me at least, are nothing short of absolute classics. If you want to watch some more Doctor Who content, then I highly recommend that you check out Ferb on Who. He posts reactions with fellow creatives, has a Who-themed game show, Gallifrey Geeks, and also posts the occasional meme compilation. And who doesn't love a good dose of Who memes? If you want to read more about Doctor Who and the making of it, then I highly recommend the Complete History series of books, which I used as reference for this video. If you want to keep up to date with this series, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and if you want to see new episodes of the series early, then you can by supporting us on Patreon or via my Ko-fi page. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and leaving your thoughts on Season 22 in the comments section below. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV, and we'll see you next time for Season 23.